Hello, thank you for coming, everybody. Today we have Aleks Palanac. Am I saying that correctly, actually?
Yes, that's right.
So this is the third interview in our Teaching Through Crisis series. So far on Monday, we had Paul Dummett talking about supporting refugee learners. And then on Thursday morning, we had Catherine Billsborough on sharing all our ideas for how to incorporate refugee matters into classrooms that might not necessarily have people from refugee backgrounds in them. And today we have Aleks Palanac, who is an expert on trauma-informed teaching, to teach us all about trauma. And because a lot of our students, certainly a lot of my students, I find that maybe they'll be distracted in class, they maybe won't be prioritising their work, the English language teaching, they've got a lot going on, they're worrying about their families back home, they're maybe reliving things that have happened to them, maybe on their journey over or the reason why they left. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Aleks on to share her knowledge with us. So Aleks, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Hi Emily, and hi everyone. Thanks for coming along today. And Emily, thanks for having me here to talk about this. So my name is Aleks Palanac, and I've been teaching, I've been involved in English language teaching since 2004 and started out teaching community ESOL with a mix of students, including some refugee students. But then I moved into academic English teaching about 10 years ago, and the mix of students was quite different. There were international students, generally from more affluent backgrounds, and there were no refugee students in the mix there. So I then started kind of thinking about that and started doing some work to try and make English for academic purposes more accessible to refugee students, to try to kind of remove some of the barriers, like financial barriers, for example, and the barrier of entry tests to get onto these pre-sessional academic English programs. So that involved lots of kind of partnership working, and also we got involved in this Universities of Sanctuary scheme, and to work to make our university a University of Sanctuary, which was welcoming. And also other things which I've kind of been involved with related to that are, so I convene a SIG called EAP for Social Justice. And we do, some of the work that we do involves kind of widening participation for refugees as well. And one of the schemes which has kind of come out of my work with the SIG and also work of University of Leicester is a scheme called Refugee, which is basically trying to get different organisations and volunteers from around the country together to kind of create a programme of free classes of academic English for refugees wishing to enter university system. So yeah, those are the main things, and also trauma, of course. So trauma has been a real interest of mine for the past 7 years or so. So I've been working to do some research into that and trying to work out what are some beneficial kind of strategies that teachers might need to be aware of to help refugee students in the classroom.
Yeah, that all sounds amazing. Like, your work is incredible for supporting learners. I find it quite difficult for progression. There's not many universities that maybe have that kind of support, certainly in the UK. So the Sanctuary scheme is, sorry, we're going off topic a bit. This isn't really about trauma, is it?
That's okay.
But yeah, the Sanctuary scheme, that's a few universities, or? It
is actually, it's really kind of snowballed in the last few years. So when we became a University of Sanctuary, I think that was back in 2018, I think there were only about 7 or 8 other universities of sanctuary, but now actually that number has really grown. I think it's at about 20 or 30 now. From memory. Yeah, because there's now a kind of Universities of Sanctuary mailing list, and people are kind of sharing good practice and helping each other, kind of answering each other's queries about things, kind of sharing evidence of things that have worked. So it all kind of helps them build a case for putting this to their university management schemes.
That's so good. And they get scholarships and support throughout.
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think you'll put, someone's going to put a link to that scheme in the chat. Is that right? I think we have Julie to put some links in the chat for us. Thank you, Julie. So can you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to start researching trauma?
Yeah, I mean, basically it was like in the autumn of 2015, when the Syrian refugee crisis was very much in the news. I decided that I wanted to do something to kind of to get involved, to help in some way. And I thought, well, what better to do as an English language teacher than to use the kind of skills and experience that I have as a language teacher to try and help. So I think I'm seeing a similar thing, actually. I saw a similar thing last autumn when there were a number of refugees coming to the UK from Afghanistan. And again, now with the Ukraine crisis, with refugees from there coming in. And there's kind of like, seems to be kind of waves of volunteer teachers who kind of, who come forward to kind of get involved in this. And so, yeah, I was in one of those kind of waves back in 2015, and but when I kind of started getting involved in teaching refugees, one thing that was really at the forefront of my mind was this kind of anxiety of, how do you deal with trauma? You don't want to do something that's going to trigger something for someone in the classroom. And this anxiety was shared by other teachers who I was talking to, who were also working with refugees. Like I did some teacher training out in refugee camps in Greece around 2017, and a lot of those teachers were also saying, but what do we do about trauma? We're seeing this an awful lot in our students. What sorts of topics should we be broaching or avoiding? Is it okay to kind of ask students to talk about their lives in class, as we often do in the language classroom? How do we go about creating a safe space? What does that even mean? So that kind of prompted me to start looking around to see, what research already existed, or what kind of practical advice was already available to ESOL teachers. And I didn't find very much at all at that time. It was all very kind of scattered between different disciplines. There was like, there was some information in trauma psychology, and there was some in refugee studies. And then you have information in, ELT pedagogies, but like it hadn't really all been brought together. So I thought, well, what would be useful is to start then mapping together those insights and trying to see where were the resonances and where were the places where trauma-informed pedagogy might be different, or might require a different approach from what we normally do in ESOL. So it needed a kind of multidisciplinary approach, like looking at psychology, looking at pedagogy, looking at ELT, and trying to put something together. So I basically then started, once I gathered some findings, I started to share these. How to recognize trauma, how to adapt your teaching, how to help students learn and thrive if they have trauma.
And how would you recognise trauma? I remember there's been incidents at the college of students breaking down in tears, and we've had people who maybe we thought were having a heart attack, but then discovered later it was a panic attack.
Wow.
It was all very stressful for the teacher involved and for the students as well. And what is trauma, and how can teachers recognise it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important for teachers to kind of have a heads up really about, what to look for. I mean, basically, just to give you a bit of background then, so trauma, which, I mean, the extreme version can be post-traumatic stress disorder, but this can come about in some people if they've been exposed to a potentially traumatic event. And we know that refugee background students have by and large been exposed to these sorts of events, and it's basically an emotional response to that event, which can then lead to kind of medium-term effects like unpredictable emotions and flashbacks, like you mentioned, strained relationships, physical symptoms. So it can basically have knock-on effects on lots of different areas of people's lives. And also, their language learning and their kind of behaviour in the classroom. So it affects things like people's ability to think rationally, and also it can lead to kind of unregulated fear responses. So they can be very, very jumpy, very kind of on edge, very anxious. It can also affect the memory and people's ability to kind of differentiate between the past and the present. You can see how that would have a direct knock-on effect on when you're trying to teach someone something, if they're having these memory problems. And also it can make people kind of more wired for survival, so it can make them quite hyperactive, and it can put that part of their brain sort of in overdrive. So like in the classroom, like specific things that you might notice are because trauma can put people into a sort of semi-permanent fight or flight mode with kind of excess adrenaline. So you might see that they seem to be unduly kind of anxious or have a panic attack or a flashback. They might seem particularly like over alert or jumpy. They might seem very, very restless, and kind of have attention problems, like problems focusing. And they might also experience a kind of lack of trust in other students, and maybe that will affect their willingness to work with other students in pairs or groups. And kind of they might fear taking risks, like in the language classroom you have to kind of put yourself out there and and be willing to speak and maybe make mistakes. So that willingness can be affected by trauma survivors. Also, other things like, there are certain topics and activities which might trigger reactions in students, like extreme reactions, like you mentioned, somebody getting very upset. Some people might, it might lead some people to kind of overshare. If something gets triggered in them, then they might actually share to an inappropriate level, really, that might make other people feel uncomfortable. And other things like avoidance behaviours might be triggered. So you might find that avoid tests, might avoid certain topics or activities or certain people. It might also lead to them being late to class or being absent from class. That's also a sort of avoidance behaviour as well.
I guess that's what we call ESOL time. Or being late quite frequently.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and that's a good point, because sometimes it can be difficult to kind of pick apart, okay, what is kind of expected or kind of normal behavior, or also, or what is a sort of something that we might normally think of as a sort of discipline problem, even things like being late or not handing in assignments and that sort of thing. But I think if you have an awareness of trauma and of some of the behaviours that you might expect, then that kind of helps us reframe those sorts of situations, so that we bear in mind that, okay, it might be to do with trauma. It still might not, but it might be. And I think it just helps us when we're kind of thinking through these things.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely more flexible with my learners than maybe other teachers would be. Partly the culture of timekeeping, and then partly the awareness of it might just not be suitable, and students have a lot going on as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that really helps. I think that really helps students kind of relax and feel seen and heard and welcome if they can see that the teacher is kind of on the same page and kind of recognizes that that they have maybe different struggles from many other students.
Yeah. So how can teachers? So we're talking about teachers being a bit more flexible with their learners and having that awareness of the behaviours, but how else could teachers maybe support students?
I mean, there's a number of things that teachers can do. So one thing is to help reduce some of the daily stressors that refugee students are often facing. So being understanding and being aware of reasons for things like lateness, absence, not being able to do homework, that sort of thing, so that we already mentioned, that's a key thing. But also in the ESOL classroom, we're perfectly set up to give people language for their daily needs. So things like, talking to the doctor, talking to the solicitor, things like that, kind of things that they might need to talk about in their home office interview, for example. So these are things that we can practically do to help people with those things that might be causing a lot of anxiety in their daily lives. Other things that we can do, things like referring people to suitable agencies and services. Because one danger of, when we're teaching refugee background students is sometimes we try to take on too much, and we need to know when it's appropriate to refer to other services who are kind of maybe more specialised.
So I guess it's getting to know what's happening in the area and set up maybe some partnership links and
exactly, that's really important. I mean, and it's not always, not necessarily every teacher has got capacity to do that themselves, but that's where institutional support really comes to its own. And, institutions need to back teachers up in this. And, they could provide a list of, agencies or departments within their own organisation that teachers can refer refugee background students to. So, institutions can do other things as well to help reduce some of these stresses, like providing, for example, fee waivers. So at Leicester University, where I work, we provide fee waivers for academic English classes, and that's a major barrier that's removed, and then it immediately allows people to access something that they couldn't access before, because of financial hardship. So that first area, so helping to reduce those daily stresses, that's one thing we can do. Another thing is to help to create a sort of safe space in the classroom environment. That one is really important, and it keeps coming up in the trauma literature as a kind of key thing. And this is really important to kind of help reduce people's anxiety levels. And so for some trauma survivors, the classroom may be the only safe space that they might actually experience in their daily lives, potentially. But that's only
like a welcome distraction from all the things that they're focusing on.
Exactly. And there are a number of things we can do consciously to try and kind of make that classroom into a safe space. So we can So kind of trying to create a friendly classroom environment where people kind of trust each other, where people feel welcome, people are seen and heard. There's opportunity for interaction, for people to share ideas, things like that. The kind of chance to kind of work with others in that way. But also, it's important for the classroom to be a physically safe space as well. So obviously no physical hazards, plenty of lighting. Some trauma survivors might feel more happy sitting next to the door, for example, because of things that they might have been through.
Things like having their work on the walls and kind of warm, welcoming, colourful murals or classwork.
Exactly. Yeah. All those sorts of things to help people feel like they belong. It's like a place of belonging. But there's other things as well that we might not always think about, but which can help to promote the safe space. So things like it's really important for trauma survivors to feel like they're not kind of boxed in or cornered. And so not necessarily only physically, but also in terms of we need to give people agency and a sense of control over certain things in the classroom, like giving people the chance to opt out of activities if they want to, especially if those activities are related to talking about maybe personal lives or things like that. That's a really key thing. Like we need to always give them an opt-out option, basically. And that also goes for so in the language classroom, we quite often nominate people to answer questions in open class and that sort of thing. But that could also be applied to that as well, because being nominated is kind of a way of not really giving someone much of a choice, saying, right, you're talking next. And that has been linked to, there's one author, Stone, in 1995. So he said actually he found that for some trauma survivors or torture survivors, that actually reminded them of being interrogated, being nominated like that. So obviously there are kind of ways of doing this which might be less sort of less like putting someone on the spot. I would say I think it's just something that we might need to be aware of. It doesn't necessarily affect every student, but I think once we kind of get to know a class a little bit better and maybe have already established some kind of good rapport, good relationships, then we know what people feel comfortable with and what they don't. I mean, another thing is about having routine and structure. So that sort of thing, that kind of predictability, setting expectations, that sort of thing can help people feel safe as well. And I think that's what a lot of ESOL teachers already do. They might have a sort of quite a predictable way of maybe starting the lesson, like some routine things that they do maybe, and they might have a routine sort of way of finishing the lesson. But that's very helpful also for trauma survivors.
Okay.
Another thing, so we talked a little bit about personalization, and I think this is a real biggie, because this is something that in English language teaching, this is something that we're like positively encouraged to do. Like in the humanistic and communicative approaches, they say, you know, it's good for learner motivation to personalize things. It helps with retention, that sort of thing. But obviously this is a real sticking point when it comes to trauma, because many trauma survivors just don't want to talk about their lives, don't want to talk about their past lives in particular. And so how do you actually reconcile these things? So that is a tricky one. So I think we come back to this idea of giving people choice and control and agency over the situation. So we must never kind of corner people into answering a direct question about themselves. Certainly not until we kind of get to know them a little better.
And then they get to know the class as well, because they'll be more comfortable if they know the class and they've made friends.
Exactly. So all of that is kind of that's all setting the essential groundwork for then being to putting people into the right mindset and feeling comfortable to actually be able to then learn and focus on these sorts of topics. So basically one way that you could handle this is, instead of kind of saying to each student, right, now you each need to talk about, for example, your family, let's say you're learning members of the family, instead of saying that, then you might give them a choice. You could say, okay, so I would like you to talk about our family. So it could be your family, or maybe you provide them with a fictional family. Maybe you talk about a family, maybe a famous family, like the royal family or something like that. So then, or you can say, or you can talk about a different family that you know. So
I quite often get them to talk about their friends, like maybe their close friends in Scotland, or their close friends in the area, who have kind of become their family in a way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's the thing. Yeah, kind of getting them to focus on maybe things that are going on now in their present lives is kind of tends to be safer.
Yeah.
Sorry, tends to be safer than trying to ask them about their own families. But so, I mean, I think some people who work with refugee students are kind of a bit conflicted about whether to even broach these sorts of topics at all. Things like family or things like journeys, that sort of thing. But I've given that quite a bit of thought and thought, you know, well, what would be the consequences of not talking about family or journeys or childhoods and things like that? And I think the consequences would be that then they wouldn't necessarily have the language to be able to talk to solicitors or in the Home Office interview. How could they then express themselves? And they need that language. So we do have I think we do have a duty as kind of English language teachers to find a way to bring that language into the classroom, but to do it in such a way that people don't feel forced into talking about something they don't feel comfortable with.
Yeah, that's going to be triggering for them.
Yeah. I mean, another kind of final area to really mention when it comes to strategies for the classroom is to try to do things to kind of help reduce some of the trauma symptoms that people might be experiencing. So, for example, like some trauma survivors find it really difficult to see incremental progress in their learning. So they tend to see things in terms of all or nothing. And so what can be really helpful is to kind of incorporate, like help them with goal setting, because trauma survivors can really struggle with kind of metacognitive tasks like goal setting and planning and evaluating. So we can help them, we can support them with that. I mean, we often do in ESOL, I mean, with things like individual learning plans, but that kind of being able to have those regular progress checks and tick things off is really, really helpful. It gives people a structure and it helps them to really be able to see this progress. And yeah, we can also do things like grounding activities. So if people kind of feel it looks like someone's dissociating or maybe having a flashback or something, we can try to really bring people back into their bodies and into the present moment by kind of getting them to stand up and sit down, or kind of focus on the weight of their body in the chair, or kind of maybe, I know some teachers like to do jazz chants and things like that, rhythmical things, things that get you moving. So
do you think mindfulness practices or kind of meditations are helpful?
Yes, they can be as well. Yeah. So anything which kind of gets them back into their body, into the present moment. I know one teacher that does a few kind of yoga moves with their students in the classroom as well. So yeah, those sorts of things can really get them back.
Yeah, and you think drawing? I mean, I'm a graphic facilitator, so I'm a bit obsessed with drawing myself.
Yes.
But yeah, I find that my students quite like the relaxation of it. And
yeah, I mean, yeah, I would imagine that would be, yeah, exactly. That's a kind of multi-sensory thing. I would imagine that would be very helpful as well. I mean, it would be really useful to kind of have a chat about that another time.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
About the resonances between those two things.
Oh, that'd be good. And what about just as a kind of last question, how about so teachers, it can be quite stressful when you've got a student who's maybe had a bad experience and maybe it comes out in class, they've had a flashback or a panic attack, and it can be quite traumatic for the teacher in a way, and they can go home and worry about that student. And how can teachers look after themselves when they're supporting trauma experienced learners?
I mean, yeah, that's a very real possibility that teachers might feel overwhelmed, because you know, ESOL teachers are quite often pretty much at the front line of dealing with trauma, because a lot of students really struggle to access mental health services for a number of reasons. So yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that teachers can do. I mean, first of all, you know, there's this big buzzword at the moment, which is about self-care, and that is really important for people, for teachers working with traumatized students, to make sure that you don't burn out. Self-care can be anything that kind of makes you de-stress, relax, walking, reading, that sort of thing, but also being able to set boundaries as well, with learners, but also boundaries, emotional boundaries in your own head as well, because we're not able to help other people if we're not okay ourselves. So we have to know when to refer, like, for example, to other agencies. Also, peer support is really important. So being able to talk to other teachers, managers in the same institution, or maybe through other, like, online support groups, or maybe through special interest groups, through maybe IATEFL or maybe BALEAP, and just kind of talking with other people who are dealing with similar things is really important. But also, I mean, teachers being okay, like, teacher well-being isn't just down to the teacher. It's also the responsibility of institutions. They have to make sure that that they put systems and processes in place to make sure that teachers are okay as well. So teachers need to know, where they can go if they need support themselves, and they also need to know that it's helpful if there's a community of practice there, but also CPD opportunities, things like trauma training, and kind of orientation training about refugee background students and what they might have been through. All of that, some of it might be, teachers might be able to access some of it outside their institution, but institutions need to also make sure that that's available.
And do you know of any courses available out there that are in this field, or, I mean, off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot a bit there. Well,
I know of some people who are running workshops or giving talks on this topic. So, for example, Laura Agbasso. So I think you're going to be talking to her as part of this series. There's a researcher called Mays Imad. So she's talking about trauma-informed pedagogy. I'm not sure if it's particularly relevant to, like, specifically to ESOL, but it's more widely relevant. But also, I know that, like, some of the SIGs, like the IATEFL ESOL SIG has ran a workshop recently on this. I think
they're good to follow on Twitter or social media.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great source of information about when these things are coming up. There's also on Facebook, since we're on Facebook right now, I mean, there's a couple of good groups that I follow. One is called the Trauma-Informed Educators Network. And one is called Refugee Concerns, a TESOL interest section. I think that's an American organization, I think. But yeah, they're also useful, and they have links to useful professional development opportunities. But I think ultimately, I think, CPD is one thing, but I think ultimately I'd really like to see trauma-informed pedagogy being incorporated into initial teacher training. I think CELTA, for example, could really do with having some input on this. PGCEs as well. People need to have a heads up about what trauma is, what it looks like, and how they can help. It's so important.
Okay, well, just to finish up, because we're just aware of the time, do you have anything else that you'd like that you've not had a chance to mention that you think would be important for people to know?
I mean, I would say, just as a kind of a couple of key takeaways, I mean, I would say what's really important for a teacher to keep at the front of their mind when they're teaching students who've been through trauma is to really it's important to have an idea of what to expect, and to plan carefully around these issues beforehand, but thinking about certain topics and how you might deal with them. But also, we don't actually know at the end of the day what exactly might trigger what in which students. Anything can be a trauma trigger. It could be a smell, it could be somebody's body language, it could be unanticipated things. So we need to kind of be very attentive and be willing to be responsive and flexible on the spot, basically. And most importantly, we just need to be kind, we need to be welcoming, we need to see and hear our students on a human level. we need to have empathy, we need to be supportive, and yeah, focus on relationship building and trust building in the classroom, and that will kind of set the foundation really for everything else. I mean, and one final thought. So, you know, most teachers are not trained therapists. I'm not a trained therapist. You know, I'm coming at this from a teacher's perspective as well. So I think, you know, there is a lot that we can do in the classroom to support our students kind of psychosocially with this stuff, to help to mitigate some of the effects of trauma, and to help them learn and to help them with their well-being. But that there is always that boundary between teacher and therapist, and so we always need to be careful. We need to know the limits of our own agency, really, and our own roles. Yeah, so that's the main thing, really.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely amazing. I've learned a lot from you, and
thanks so much for having me. And
yeah, so
it's really good talking to you.
So keep an eye out for more sessions. Watch this space; they are coming soon. And we'll add all the links to some of Alex's research into the comments, and maybe we can add the Facebook groups that you mentioned as well into the comments.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and if you've got any comments or questions, then please write them in the comments. Okay, so yeah, thanks for coming, everybody, and we will see you in the interview number 4. So we'll keep you posted about that. Watch this space. Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.